The following content is provided under a Creative Commons license. Your support will help MIT OpenCourseware continue to offer high-quality educational resources for free. To make a donation or view additional materials from hundreds of MIT courses, visit MIT OpenCourseware at ocw.mit.edu.
So by way of review, we're going to start off with loops. So what are two loops that we've covered in lecture, or two types of loops? Wow, good response. Okay, yeah, so for and while. So I'm going to start with while loops because that's what I have first. Can someone walk me through the syntax of a while loop? So while condition, and what type is this condition? Okay, and then I have, and then a block of code, right? Indicated by indentation. Okay, so next question is, what does this code do? So, right, that's a little bit too high level, but kind of specifically, what does this loop do?
Prints the even numbers from 2 to 10.
Perfect. So that's exactly the kind of comment we're looking for. When you're doing your problem sets or you're just coding in general, you want to have a comment that describes in an abstract way what's going on in chunks of code. You don't want to have a comment that says, like, I don't know, assigns 2 to A, continues looping until A is. Comments like that aren't really helpful because you can get that from reading the code. So that's exactly right. It's perfect. I don't have candy to pass out, though. So the next question is, what's the decrementing function? So the way to think of a decrementing function is that it's a statement that moves the loop closer to termination. So in this case, well, in this case, I would, 10 minus A or A plus equal 2, right? So we're moving, as we're incrementing A, we're getting closer and closer to 10, and that's going to cause us to kick out of the loop. Right. Do I have anything else to cover now? Okay, next thing, is A a good variable name? So the answer is no, otherwise we wouldn't have asked it. But a better variable name might be even number, right? Because instead of just A being an integer, now we know what it's supposed to represent in the code. And it becomes clearer when we go to execute it or run it. Okay. So, for loops, same thing. Can someone walk me through the syntax for a for loop? And first question, does this loop do the same thing as a while loop? So if this is our while loop, does this loop do the same thing? Okay, let's see. So the while loop printed out 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12. So this is going to print out 8 and 10. So the reason is where we have the increment, right? If we had done this, then they would print out both the same. But a little aside. That was a bug I just caught. All right. So someone walk me through the syntax for a for loop. So for keyword, and then what do we have here? a variable of some sort. And then we have in keyword, and then we have this thing here. So we're going to get to tuples in a second, but this is a tuple literal, right? And for for loops, a for loop requires something that's enumerable, which means that we can take one element after the other and assign it to the variable I. All right? So for loops iterate over enumerable. For loops enumerate over, or iterate over enumerable items. Thank you. That's exactly what I was talking about. If I'm speaking too low, just jack your thumbs up. All right. So this construction, though, is kind of inconvenient, though, because if we wanted to list all the numbers that we wanted to print, like, so 2 to 10 is not too hard. But let's say we wanted all the even numbers between 2 and 100. I don't want to have to write out all, 50 of those. So we get to the range function. And you've seen this before. We just haven't ever explained it, right? So all the range function does is it takes between 1 and 3 parameters and returns a list of integers. So let's say that I pass it 1 parameter. So I'm going to give it the integer 100. This is going to give me nothing because I didn't print it out. This is going to give me integers 0 to 99. All right. If I give it 2 parameters, what it's going to do is give me the numbers or integers between 1 and 100. Right. So in this case, it starts off at 1 and it gets to 99. So the one important point is that when you give it 2 parameters, the first one is inclusive and the second parameter is exclusive. Did everyone follow that? All right. And finally, the third form is with 3 parameters. And I have a start, an end, start inclusive, end exclusive, and then a step. All right. This will give me all the odd numbers between 1 and 100. Right here. And we can also go in reverse. So if I wanted to go count down from 100 to 1, I can give it a negative step. And if you want help on using the range function, there's a handy command called help, which you can type in the interactive prompt. And this gives you the syntax for using range. You can do this for any function in Python. And it's going to tell you, here's the name, here's a parameter start, here's a parameter stop, and here's a parameter step. And then this little arrow here means this is what it returns, a list of integers. When you type help and you see one of these square brackets, that means the parameter is optional. So a start is optional, step is optional. Stop, we always have a stop. So we always know when we're stopping a range. And that's why we can pass 1, 2, or 3 parameters. Is anyone confused on that?
If you only put a stop, it will start from 0 always.
Right. If you only put 1 parameter, then it will start from 0. So the start is implicit. We good on this? So we can code our for loop like that, which for 10, like I said, 5 numbers is not too inconvenient or convenient, but if we have 500 numbers, it makes it a lot easier to just change one endpoint than it is to type in 500 numbers, right? Okay. Yeah?
Can you make a range for
It's a good question. We should try it. So why don't we give it a shot? So let's say, so the question was, can we make a range of floats? So let's try 1.0 to 10.0. Well, it'll give us an answer, right? But it also gives us a warning. It says that an integer argument is expected. And so let's say I do this. Will this work? Well, what it's going to do is it's going to truncate the floats. So it's going to truncate the start to 1, and it's going to truncate the ends to 10. And then it'll just return the integers as required. So you can, but it doesn't work the way you think it would. All right, so moving on. You guys hit tuples in lecture this week. So we're kind of done with the old review stuff. So can anyone tell me what a tuple is? It's a non-scalar data type that can hold many items. Okay. What does non-scalar mean?
It says multiple elements that you can search visually.
So, well,
Field that you can hold only one value at a time.
so you're both right. So a scalar can hold only one element at a time, so a non-scalar can hold more than one element at a time, right? Tuples are actually the second scalar data type that we've seen, right? A string is the first, because a string can have multiple characters, right? So tuples are flexible. We can have tuples of numbers, which we can this syntax, the parentheses with a set of elements separated by commas. This is the literal syntax for a tuple. And all we're saying is that my tuple of numbers has, the approximation to pi, 2, 1, negative 100, et cetera. We can have tuples of strings. We can have actually tuples of anything, but we'll get to that in a second. So,
You mix the data types inside.
yes, we're going to get to that. So, so the question was, can you mix data types? And the answer is yes. We'll get to that in a second. So to access individual elements of a tuple, we do something called indexing. And we specify an index by, if I have tuple of numbers, my variable name, I have a left square bracket and a right square bracket, and then I have an integer in between. And this will give me the item in the tuple that exists at index 0. Now, tuples are indexed at starting at 0 and in increments of 1. So when I say tuple of numbers 0, what should this print out? Right. So it'll print out 3.14159. Now, if I change this to 1, what'll this print out? Exactly. So, and it doesn't matter what data type is contained in the tuple. If it's string, it'll just print out whatever's here, right? Which is what? Now, you can also use negative indices. Negative indices tell Python that I want to go to the one past the end of the tuple. So in this case, tuple of strings, I'm like out here somewhere, and then walk back 1, or walk back however many the integer is. So I have here a tuple of strings minus 1, so Python's going to go to somewhere around here, and then walk back 1, and give me name, right? Now what if I do minus 3? What's that going to print out? Is. All right. Now, let's see who's paying attention. What's this going to do? It's going to
My name. Or name, rather.
Well, remember, we index tuples at 0, right?
Oh, so that's going to give an error.
Exactly. So it's going to tell us index out of range, right? We have 4 elements in tuple strings, 0, 1, 2, 3. Whoops, we're off. So you can get outside of a tuple and get an error. To avoid that, sorry?
Oh, well, the thing is, like, when you said print tuple of numbers, you said 1, it printed the 3.141 number, which would technically be 0 in this case, wouldn't it?
No, I switched it.
Oh, you switched it.
Yeah, so just to make you feel better.
Oh, I see it now. Okay.
You got it? Okay. It's always possible that I made an error, so. Okay, so in your code, in order to avoid that, you can check yourself by getting the length of tuple of numbers. So there's a function len, right? And it's going to tell us that tuple of numbers has 6 elements. We can count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what's the last index of this tuple? 5, right? Now, back to your question. Tuples can hold different data types. Or they can hold different data types that are different from each other, and I'm wording that improperly. But, so here we have a float and 3 strings. Okay, this is a heterogeneous data structure. A homogeneous data structure would be one that you would say only holds ints or only holds floats. But tuples are very flexible. So we have a float here and some strings, and then you can also have tuples that contain other tuples. So in this case, how many elements does tuple of tuples have? 3, right? You have the first element is a tuple, the second element is got, and the third element is real. So what should this print out? Yeah. Okay. I had to sanitize that quote.
Why is it not being brackets?
Well, Python's behavior, when it sees a tuple data type and you call it with the print statement, is it represents as a string a tuple the way you would literally see or literally write out a tuple. So stuff just is a tuple with the 2 strings stuff and just. So Python is going to print out the literal representation of that tuple. So if I were, so another way, I'm going to try and explain it. Let's say that I print out the entire tuple. What should this look like? Well, it's going to be just the literal representation of the tuple. You see? All right. What does it mean for a data type to be immutable?
You can't change it, like you can't add another element into it.
You can't change it. So if I try to change the first element of tuple of numbers, it's going to tell me it doesn't support, or Python's going to tell me it doesn't support item assignment. And you'll see this error. All right. Tuples support something called slicing, which means that if I have a tuple of numbers and I give it where I normally put just a single integer for an index, if I give it a start index and an end index separated by this colon, Python's going to get the item at index 1 to whatever this end element is minus 1. So it helps if I just print it out. And to make it a little bit easier to follow, right? So I've told Python that I want to slice out of this tuple from 1 to 3. And what Python's going to go do is look in tuple of numbers. This is element 0. This is index 1, so it's going to pull in 2. This is index 2, so it's going to pull in 1. And then 3, well, in Python, we go 1 past the end of the range that we want. So it's going to return a tuple of 2, 1. This is slicing a tuple. Anyone confused by that? No? Wow. All right. So there are many different ways that we can slice a tuple. So we can have an implicit start. So if you see this, where there's no number before the colon, and that tells Python start at index 0. And then in complementary fashion, if you see this, where you have an integer on the left side and nothing on the right side, it tells Python go from index 1 all the way to the end of the tuple. All right. What happens if I do this? What's that telling Python to do? Yeah, it looks kind of redundant, but it will become important to us when we get to lists and something called aliasing. But what this does is it tells Python to take a slice that is the entire tuple. And then when we do these slices, we can also use negative indices. So this is going to tell Python to go from 0 to the last element minus 1. So it'll look like that. Everyone following? We good?
Oh, so it was minuses from the end?
Yeah.
Tuple? Okay.
So I wonder if this would work, actually. I actually don't know. No, it has unexpected behavior. So I don't know why. I'll have to look that up. So tuples are also, we already said earlier that they're enumerable items, right? So we can use a for loop with them. So if I want to print out all the numbers in tuple of numbers, I have my for loop, my variable, in, and then my enumerable object. Okay? So I have a question now. Who thinks this will work? We know that tuples are immutable.
You have changed the inside.
Right. So it's going to work. I still have a print up here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking tuple of numbers and I'm printing before, and then what I'm doing here is I'm telling Python to take this tuple and add them together and reassign it back to tuple of numbers. So it looks sort of like I'm modifying the tuple. But in reality, what's happening is I'm modifying, or I'm creating a new tuple. So let's say I have ton here. Ton is short for a tuple of numbers. Originally, it's telling Python that some chunk of memory has a tuple of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? When I say a statement like ton equal ton plus another tuple, what it's telling Python to do is create another chunk of memory that includes ton, whatever's in ton, and the other tuple. All right? And then this assignment statement tells Python that ton now points to this new object. You had a question? It's an advanced question, but the question was, does Python have a garbage collector to discard this memory that's no longer being used? And the answer is yes. And if you don't know what a garbage collector is, don't worry about it. You don't need to. But, you know, to answer your question, yes, it does. I don't want to get too far into it. Does everyone follow that? That also is going to be important when we get to lists and aliasing. That type of object creation and modification. So, but we won't get to that for a while. So everyone's good with this? I can move on? All right. Python has what some would be considered a wart when it comes to tuples. And that is when you want to create a tuple with a single element in it. So people just starting out with Python would sometimes mistake a tuple, the tuple literal of a single element to be this. So parentheses with a single integer. The problem is that parentheses are the grouping operator in Python, but they're also used for making tuples. They serve a dual purpose. And what Python will say is, oh, I've got a number between two parentheses. Well, this person really wants this integer to have high precedence, so we're going to make an integer 50 and assign it to oopsie. But it's not what we want. We want a tuple with 50 as one element. And the way you do that is you have a lone comma after the first element. All right, so if we print out if we run this and we look at what it prints out, you see that oopsie has the integer 50, which is not what we want. We want what's in onesie. Oh, onsie. Anyone confused by that? Okay. We're zooming along here. So, strings. They're actually a lot like tuples. They're immutable, so you can't change them. They're non-scalar. They have multiple characters within them. So if I print it out, everyone's seen this. I can get to individual characters. So if I want to get to the first character in name, I use 0. If I want to get to the second character, I can use 1. And then, of course, they're immutable, so that's going to tell me that I can't do that. All right. And they also support iteration. So if I want to print out all the letters in name, 1 on each line, I can do this. Not too useful, but it works. You look confused. How did that happen? So, name is a string, right? Follow that? String is just a bunch of characters. And it is enumerable, meaning that we can go one character at a time through the string. And that's what the for loop does.
Do spaces count as characters?
Okay, the question was, do spaces count as characters? And the answer is yes, they do. So if I write spaces there, and I run this again, as I iterate through the string, I get a space where I'm supposed to. Okay. Is everyone good with this? Okay. And like tuples, you can take slices. Well, that's going to give me it. Strings also have a lot of, or many functions. All right. So this is an incomplete list of functions that you can use on string objects. So I can make everything uppercase. Lowercase. I can also find characters. Oops. What did I do? There we go. All right. So what find does is it finds the index of the leftmost character. So if I want to find I, says it returns 1 because I is at index 1 in the string. And I can also do something like this. I can find an entire string. And TCH, the substring, starts at index 2. If it doesn't find it. So let's put in garbage. -1. All right. We can also call a replace function. So if I want to replace M with P, doesn't make sense anymore. I can do that. Now the question is, how would I use this to change the string? So think back to how we modified the tuple. We created a new object and we assigned it to a variable the same name, right? So if I know that replace is going to return a string with M replaced, I can do that. Does everyone follow that?
Does it find the leftmost version of that character you're searching for?
It's a good question. And that also gives me a perfect opportunity to demonstrate another command that you'll find helpful. So if you're working with an object like string, you can use a command in the interactive editor called dir. If you type dir str, it's going to return all of the symbols that exist within the str object. You can also type help str, and it will give you a nicer version of this. So,
So in this case, the first character indicates what you're trying to replace, and the second is what you're replacing it with.
right, so we can do help.str replace, and it'll tell us.
Yeah. Okay, so that is old. And then the count in this case would be if you had multiple instances.
Yes.
Okay, so like if you had your name a couple times, you could replace them 3 times.
Right. You know, if I were particularly narcissistic that day, right, I could replace it multiple times. So let's demonstrate that because some people might get confused. Let's say I want to replace T. And I'm going to replace it with R. Whoops. Well, why didn't it replace these 2 T's here? Right. So in strings, you differentiate between lowercase and uppercase. All right. So if I wanted to get the behavior that I was hoping for, I could do it this way. So now I have something that's not even remotely looking like English. Or I could do something like this. I'm going to make everything lowercase. And then replace the T. Yeah.
lower.
Well, remember what I said first recitation, that computers will do exactly what you tell them to do and nothing more or less. So there we go.
Good though at figuring out what you want.
Python is a very nice language. It's one of my favorite languages right now because it's not as fussy as some other languages, like MATLAB
Yeah.
or C or C++ or Tickle, any one of those. So is everyone good on strings? I can move on. Just remember, if anything, if you need help on any of these commands, just remember you have the help command at your disposal.
It'll automatically default to do everything unless you tell it to only do like 2 of the letters. Basically,
Yes.
What happens? Okay.
Oh, yeah, we didn't demonstrate that.
Yeah.
And demonstrations are worth 1,000 words. So if I only wanted to, for whatever reason, only replace the first 2 T's, I could tell it to only replace 2 T's within the string. And it leaves the other T alone.
How would you pick out the last T only?
That's a good question. I don't have a ready answer for you. Usually, you see these functions with R in front of them. This string object often has functions that will start from the right side as opposed to the left side. So like the find command I showed you, it has an rfind command as well. This guy right here. So I'm blanking on if there's the analog to replace, but can I get back to you? Because I don't want to spend all time searching for this and then fail spectacularly. So I'll get back to you on that. Is it possible? Yeah. Is there like a one-liner function? I can't tell you at the moment. So. But again, that's why you have dir and help, right? You can find this out on your own. So, all right. So next thing, break. So we're done with strings, we're done with tuples, and we're still working on loops. So everyone's seen this function before, right? This is our find the cube of a perfect, or find the cube root of a perfect cube function. So if I give it 27, and I tell Python to stop printing my name. All right, that's what this does. And as a toy example to illustrate the break statement, first of all, can someone tell me kind of in English what the break statement does?
You would just stop the loop and stop the program.
Well, it doesn't stop the program, but it kicks you out of the loop. So we can rewrite the cube root program to work like this. So instead of our stopping criteria being answer cubed less than the absolute value of the number, we're just going to tell the for loop to go from a range 0 to the absolute value of the input plus 1. Why do we have the plus 1 there? Yeah, because otherwise it would go to 1 before the absolute value of x. And then we break out of this loop if answer cubed is equal to absolute value of x. So as soon as we see that it's equal to x, we're going to call break, and that's going to immediately kick us out to here without executing any more of the for loop. All right. Do people understand that? Are people good with that?
Rick, if you have the innermost loop, if you have multiple loops, just
Yes. Good question. Does it break you out of the innermost loop or all the loops? And the answer is the innermost loop. So when he says innermost, what he's talking about are nested loops. So let's say I have something like this. And I'm creating on the fly now, so excuse my inability to type. So what is this going to do? This is an example of a nested loop. All right? We have an outer loop here, and then we have an inner loop here. And all the outer loop is doing is it's going from the integers 0, 1, 2, 3 to 9, right? And then we have an inner loop which looks like it should go from the integers 10 to 100. But we have the statement in here. If j mod 2, right? That's what the percent sign is, modulus, is equal to 0. So what we're saying is if j is evenly divisible by 2, we're going to break. Now, the question is, this is obviously going to break when j is 10. So, I mean, this loop is going to execute once. The question is, does it print out only one set of ij values, or does it print out 10? And so I'm getting to the answer to this question is, if break statement breaks out of all the loops, then we would only see one printout of I and j. But if it only breaks out of this inner loop, then we should see 10, right? Followed by here. So it breaks out of the inner loop. So long answer, but demonstration. Okay? Is anyone confused by that? All right. Is anyone too shy to admit it? Okay. There's office hours. Or you can talk to me afterwards. Okay. All right, so now we're going to get to functions, which are triple underlined and circled over here because they're extraordinarily important for you to understand. Can someone, kind of wing it and tell me what they think a function is? You want to try?
It's a snippet of code that takes some input, does something to it, returns output.
Perfect. It's a bit of code. It's named, so you can refer to it, that takes input, does something with it, and returns some value. Right? And the way that we do it, or define a function in Python, is like so. Let's say I have a function cube. It consists of a few parts. We've got the def keyword. We've got a name, cube. Names should be meaningful for functions. Like variables, names should mean something. It's like this would be a bad name for this function. We want it to be meaningful. Has a set of parameters. In this case, it only has one parameter. This is what we pass to the function when we call it. And we'll talk about that in a second. It has this string. This is called a doc string. It's the specification for this function. And when you write functions, it's good to have this string here, because what it allows you to do is describe what the function does, what it expects for input, and what it gives you as output. Right? And in this case, it's very simple. This is the body of the function. Again, we denote the block by indenting. And all it does is it takes a number, which is passed into it, and raises it to the third power. And then this return statement tells Python to send that back to whoever called the function. So, as an example of this working, let's look at this line of code. What it's doing is, we've seen the print statement, so we know what it does. It's going to name cube, and it's going to call it. And Python knows it's calling it because it's got the name of the function with the input parameters. So 3 is being passed to cube to be, well, cubed. And what's going on here is that Python is breaking out of its normal flow of execution, sending 3 and calling it number in the function, and then raising it to the third power. So if we run this, we see 27. All right, and we can pass it any number that we want. So is anyone confused on this?
The things you wrote in between the quotation marks, those are like comments, right? They don't do anything.
They don't do anything. So the question was, this string here between the quotation marks, this doesn't do anything. No, this is a comment. This is so that you can tell yourself, 6 months down the road what you were thinking, or so that you can tell another programmer what this function does. It's a way of documenting your code.
But yeah, like cube in this case is something that's built into the program.
Yeah, this is just a toy example. I wanted to keep it simple. So, I'm illustrating concepts. So yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard just to do, this, right? All right, so I'm going to move on. Everyone's good with functions?
If you put instead of return number of 3,
Uh-huh.
and you say like put x equals number can you keep the number and you just make it into a variable without putting the return function?
Right.
If you do you have to use the return function that way?
Actually, I was just getting to that. So the question is, do you have to use a return function? And the answer is, well, it depends on what you want to do. So let's take a look at a new function. Now, can someone tell me what this does? Well, first, what does the function do? Or what is it supposed to do?
Takes the number and doubles it.
Right. And you got that by reading the writing on the wall, right? Really, it's too easy. And in the body of the function, all it does is it creates a new variable, answer, and it assigns number times 2 to it. Okay? Now, what's going to print out here? Well, why don't we run it and see? That's not doing what we wanted. So when you don't have a return statement, Python returns implicitly none to whoever calls the function. Okay? So in this case, this function obviously doesn't have a return statement. So Python says, okay, well, I'm just going to return none. And whatever work it did in the function is lost in this case. So to get the right functionality, we have to add a return statement. Okay? And it works. Was that what you were getting at? Okay. Anyone confused? Can I move on? All right. All right. So functions have something called variable scope. And I apologize for the punning. I was getting tired when I wrote this. So this chunk of code, I define a global variable, all hope. All right. I also define a function that takes a parameter variables, and it says it steals all the variables, but I don't know how it does that in the computer. And it doesn't return anything. In the body of the function, I create another variable called my variable, right? And I assign it, a string. And then I'm not actually returning anything, right? Because I've said I'm not returning anything. All this is doing is just printing stuff out. So it's printing out what the parameter passed into it was. It's printing out variables. It's printing out all hope, which is a global variable that we define up here. And it's printing out my variable, which is a local variable in the function. All right? Down here, defining, a variable, old meme is old, and then I'm calling the function. So it does what we expect it to do. What I want to illustrate, though, is what happens if I do this? Well, as you might expect, it's going to give me an error, right? The reason is that my variable has local scope to this function. All vars are belong to us. Is anyone confused by this? No one's confused by this? Okay. So let's try something else. Well, actually, let's not do that. All right, so if I run this code, we can tell from the function that it's taking one parameter, it's incrementing that parameter, it's incrementing this global int that we've defined up here, and it's returning the parameter that it's just incremented. Let me erase my corny humor. Now the question now is, let's say that I have a variable y, and I give it a value of 10. I'm being completely arbitrary. If I call the variable init on y, first of all, what's going to print? And then if I print out the value of y, what's going to print? Now, why don't we run it? Uh-oh. I'm failing. Hey. So I'm stepping on myself here. This is why you don't debug code on the fly. So if I have a global variable and I need to reference it, I use a global keyword. You should never have to do this, though. Right? So init is going to return 11, right? Because it's taken y, which is 10, and it's called x equal x plus 1. And then it's returned this x, right? But if I look at what y is, after I've run this, y is still 10. This is, because when we've passed in x here, and we've called x equal x plus 1, it's actually shadowing itself. It's overriding what's in the local parameter. But it's not overriding the actual variable y. We'll get more into this later on. But the important thing to understand in this case is that the changes that you make to this parameter stay within the function. We good? All right, so I need to move pretty quickly now. Gotchas. Guarantee you someone's going to make this mistake. Print is not return. All right. When you call print is not return, it's going to call this function, and it will print out this string, but it's not actually returning this string. What it's returning is none because there's no return statement, right? And that's where this none comes from. Return is not print. So if I say print this return value, it will print this, will return a string. But if I just call this, it's not going to print it again. It's going to print nothing. Right. You'll just have to make a mistake. All right. One thing to be careful of in Python is functions. Remember I said everything is an object? Functions are no different. Functions are objects. So if you just reference the function's name, cube, which is not defined now. It's going to print something out that looks like that. All right. This is the object of, or what the object looks like to Python. In order to actually call it, you have to have the parentheses with the parameters. All right. Python's not going to complain. Some programming languages will complain, Python won't. So it's possible when you're running your code, if you're trying to call a function and you forget that you forgot the parentheses and Python's just not complaining, it will merely do what you tell it to do.
You type print cube.
What's that?
You type print cube.
Yeah.
It just give you what would be.
I'm sorry, can you speak up?
If you type print
Yeah?
cube, open parentheses x, and close it.
Okay. So is x defined? Okay.
It'll give you like the entire.
Yeah, it's, yeah.